Izuku was at the lowest point he'd ever been in his life. He had learned again and again that not all men were born equal, but did he have to be constantly reminded of the fact? After having been saved by All Might from a villain attack, Izuku grabbed onto the symbol of Peace's leg as he rocketed off to wherever he needed to be next. He needed to ask him the question he'd always been asking himself since his quirkless diagnosis 10 years ago. Could he be a hero even if he doesn't have a quirk? Izuku didn't know what he was expecting from the number one hero, but he had hoped it wouldn't be the answer that was given to him. No, he couldn't be a hero without a quirk, no matter how hard he tried or how hard he wanted it. Izuku wanted to cry, to sob to himself on the now empty roof, but he couldn't bring himself to. His heart just felt dull. After being beaten down over and over, his idol saying no felt like the feather that broke the camel's back. Eventually, Izuku felt his body start marching on its own, or maybe he started walking himself, but he didn't notice. He was so out of it that he couldn't care which it was. Izuku walked, his footsteps slow and seemingly wandering, toward the sound of explosions far away. He didn't know why he was going there. His dream was over, right? It was finally crushed. Why did he feel himself having to go see another villain attack if analyzing their quirk would mean nothing? It made no sense. During his walk, a peculiar man sitting on the sidewalk drinking and eating pie caught his eye. From the smell of it, he guessed the man was intoxicating himself with a bottle of potent booze. The smell almost made Izuku's nostrils sting, and he gently brought his hand up to his nose to block it in a way that wouldn't garner the attention of the man Izuku guessed was homeless. The man had shoulder-length curly black hair covered by some tied cloth rag on his head, an unkempt 5 o'clock shadow stubble, an unbuttoned white shirt that Izuku guessed he couldn't button all the way because of how fat he was, large baggy green pants and black boots with cuffs on them to complete the ensemble. The brown-skinned man was, despite his raggedy appearance and his clearly overweight body, entirely imposing in stature. Izuku guessed that if he were to stand upright, he could have nearly 4 feet on All Might in his buff form. Izuku tried to quickly walk past him as he heard him loudly declare that the pies he was eating were some of the best cherry pies he had ever eaten. He didn't feel like getting into any trouble after his fiasco with his idol. Of course, he couldn't catch a break, he thought to himself as he heard the large man call out to him once he passed by him. "Hey kid, come over here for a second." Izuku didn't want to turn around and continued walking, but he felt compelled to do so after he saw the bottle of booze the man was previously drinking shattering next to him and splattering its contents all over the sidewalk. Looking around at the few people passing by, he unfortunately saw no one paying attention to him and the man. In fact, they seemed to be walking away faster now to try to avoid the interaction he and the homeless man were about to have. Now setting his eyes on the dark-skinned man, he saw a huge grin plastered on his face, not hiding the fact that the man was missing quite a few teeth. "Come on, I ain't gonna be violent. I have something I want to say. I'll even share a pie with you. Trust me, these are the best." Zihaha. Not wanting to provoke the man, Izuku tentatively approached him until they were facing each other. I don't have any money I can give you, sir." The man's eyes widened for a second, and then he burst out in laughter with a hearty "Zihaha. I don't want your money, kid." The man's laughter died down. As he wiped a tear from his eye, the man stayed good to his word, took a pie from the stack he was eating, laid it beside him, and then patted the ground next to him. "Sit with me, let's talk." The man reached on the other side of him, grabbed another bottle, and removed a cork from it, downing the drink and nearly finishing it in one go. "Man, am I gonna miss this booze." The man turned to Izuku once more. "Are you gonna sit down and eat, or are you going to keep me waiting all day?" Intimidated and feeling that the man would retaliate if he didn't comply, Izuku cautiously removed his backpack, threw it to the ground, and then sat down cross-legged in front of the pie the man had offered him. With the man's eyes still on him as he sat there and did nothing, Izuku decided to slowly reach for his pie, pull a small piece from it, and then start slowly eating it. The pie was indeed good, better than the pies his mom had made, at least. To his surprise, however, Izuku received a strong slap on the back as he slowly nibbled at his pie, making him nearly choke on his pie. "Come on, what's up with that? Who are you trying to impress? You're eating with a random stranger on a sidewalk. Eat with heart, with guts, enjoy your life." The man grabbed another one of his pies with one hand and brought it to his mouth. Like this, watch. The man shoved nearly a quarter of the pie into his mouth and then closed his huge mouth on it. The man savored it and laughed in enjoyment with the pie still in his mouth. After being done with his presentation, the homeless man looked toward Izuku and nudged him to do the same. Not wanting to get into trouble, Izuku swallowed the bits of pie that were already in his mouth and then grabbed the pie that was in front of him to do the same. Quickly shoving the pie into his face in fear of the man beside him, Izuku dirted his mouth with the sugary filling of the pie. Unfortunately, that didn't please the homeless man, and he grabbed Izuku by the arm, pulling him out of his pie before he could take a bite. "What the heck are you doing, idiot? Now you're just trying to copy me and shoving pie into your face." The man brought his pie up to his mouth once again. "You need to follow what you want. To hell with passers-by who might sneer at you for eating messily. Eat what you want to eat and in the amount you want to eat it. It's as simple as that." The man took a hearty bite and resumed laughing. Pulling his eyes away from the man and back to his pie, Izuku thought about it for a moment and tried to do what he was told. Slowly, Izuku brought the pie up to his mouth and took a big bite out of it. The dent he made in the pie was nowhere as near as large as the man beside him was making in his pie, but he had filled his mouth to his heart's content. With pie filling and pie crust dirtying the sides of his mouth, Izuku felt strange. Not in a bad way. Izuku felt satisfied, happy even. It felt good to be piggish in his eating of the pie. He couldn't really explain it. Izuku took another big bite out of his pie, to the great joy of the homeless man. "There you go, now you got it." The man took another swig of his booze. "I'd offer you some of what I'm drinking, but something tells me you're not of age to be drinking this yet." Izuku wasn't listening. He was entirely invested in devouring his delicious pie, which made the man laugh and made passers-by look at him in slight disgust. As Izuku continued eating, the man stretched his arms out, laid his back on the brick wall behind them, and with a big grin plastered on his face, spoke up once he closed his eyes. "You can be a hero." Izuku stopped dead in his tracks. What? I said you can be a hero. What? You got pie filling in your ears. Zihaha. Izuku couldn't believe what he was hearing. Who was this man? "I saw you grab that guy's legs while he jumped into the sky, you know? We're cut from the same cloth. You and I, we both have the guts to do what we want to. At least when it matters in your case, that is." "Did you hear my conversation with All Might?" The man ignored Izuku. "I don't know why you were disheartened by what he said. It just means that your dream will be easier to achieve. If he's given up on dreaming himself, it's gonna be dead easy." The man's hearty laugh echoed throughout the entire street, which made some onlookers passing by snicker at the display and start laughing at him. The man's eyes shot open and he threw his hands up in the air, spilling some booze on the ground as he gestured about. "Dreams should be smaller, attainable, realistic? Yeah, right. What a bunch of crap. Zehaha." More and more people were laughing now. Some had even pulled out their phones and started recording his tirade. Finally, the man slammed his drink onto the concrete pavement and looked to his right toward Izuku with a confident look filled with fire. "People's dreams never end. Am I right?" Izuku dropped his pie and it splattered on the ground. A crowd was forming now, all laughing at the boisterous display of the homeless man. Let them laugh. Let them all laugh, I say. Surpassing people ain't easy, so when you shoot for the stars, you're bound to have people that'll ridicule you. They aren't worth fighting. Hope began filling Izuku's heart once again for the first time in years. Tears were starting to form at the edges of his eyelids. Chase it. Chase your dream. Chase it with all you've got, and then more. If you do that, there's no high you won't soar to. Izuku sat there, silent, for what seemed like ages. But I'm Corkle Dash. The man interrupted Izuku by jabbing his chest with his large finger. To hell with that. In this world, power is abundant. You don't have to be born with it to obtain it. You've already got the smarts, you just need to find that power. Before their conversation could continue, the two men and the small crowd that had formed heard an explosion a few blocks away. Quickly, the crowd began running toward the explosion to see what was going on and to hopefully see a hero in action. Sorry. Looks like I interrupted you, didn't I? The man got up from his seat on the ground, patted himself off, and then stretched, getting all the aches out of his back. I'll be going now. You better get going as well if you want to catch that villain attack. Something tells me you want to be there. But before that, just one more thing. The now towering man reached into his shirt, pulled out a strange, purple fruit-looking thing with a spiral pattern adorning it, and then shoved it into Izuku's hands. One final parting gift, from one big dreamer to another. Hope you like it. Oh, and by the way, Izuku looked at the large man with eyes brimming with hope. In response, the man's already present grin grew wider, and he snickered with a quiet and breathy "Zah. I hope you do become the #1 hero." Izuku's entire world began to shatter, but unlike with how it had been with All Might not more than a few minutes ago, it felt nice, great even. Izuku saw the world in brighter shades of color. His entire life felt like it had fundamentally changed from the homeless man's words. Before he knew it, tears started falling from his eyes and onto his lap as the man walked past him and into a nearby alleyway. Izuku tried to get up and chase after him, his gift still in hand. But as he turned the corner to where he had left, he saw nothing but a dead end and a dumpster. Hurrying into the alley, Izuku searched all around him but couldn't find the towering man who had given him new hope. He even searched in the dumpster but found nothing more than trash. Panting, Izuku finally relented, stopped looking, and stared down at the fruit that had been given to him. He had only owned the object for a few minutes, yet Izuku felt like this thing in his hands, whatever it was more precious than anything he had ever owned, even his All Might merchandise. Izuku let out one final breath, and he resumed breathing at a normal pace. With tears still streaming from his eyes, he spoke out to the air, hoping that the homeless man would hear him if he was still listening to him somehow. Whoever you are, thank you. Izuku walked down the street at a fast pace as he heard more explosions in the distance. He now had a reason to analyze quirks again, so he didn't want to waste this opportunity. He didn't run at a full sprint, however, because he was still analyzing the fruit that he had been given by the strange homeless man. Yes, it was indeed a fruit. Izuku had come to that conclusion because of the smell and the feel of the object. Izuku didn't know what type of fruit it was, but it was definitively foreign. It smelled kind of sweet, but it didn't smell like any fruit Izuku had ever heard of, so he guessed it must have been from overseas. Now that he thought about it, he grew a bit suspicious of the man and this fruit. Maybe he wasn't, but he sure seemed homeless, and if he was, how had he acquired such an expensive-looking fruit? Furthermore, how had he obtained all the booze he was drinking and all the pie he and the man had eaten? Izuku started feeling bad. He had probably eaten a stolen pie and eaten with a thief now that he thought further about it. Yet, as he thought about the words the man spoke, they didn't at all feel like those of a thief, let alone a villain. The man couldn't be all bad, Izuku thought, and so he shouldn't feel that bad about eating a stolen pie. Realistically, it was only a few bottles and a few pies. For a man that big, it was likely just enough to fill his belly. The merchant could probably afford it. They weren't in a poor area, after all. Still, it felt wrong to have done what he did, even if it was in a morally gray area. Izuku decided that he'd look for any shops that might have been the victim of theft and see if he could repay the pies and booze the man had stolen. It was the least he could for the man that had rejuvenated his hope and his dream. Izuku would never lose hope again, he told himself. He'd do like the man said and chase his dream with all his might. People's dreams will never end. Izuku smiled as he recounted the words the man had said to him. With that, Izuku decided to take a bite out of the fruit, but before he did, he caught himself trying to take a conservative bite out of it. He was trying to be polite again. Thinking back to what the man had told him, Izuku furrowed his brows and dug in for a serious bite this time. Izuku filled his mouth with the fruit, eagerly eating nearly a quarter of it in one go. To his dismay, however, the fruit tasted horrendous. Izuku nearly puked as the foul taste spread on his tongue, and he thought of spitting the fruit back out, but before he would, he thought of the man again. He had tried to teach him lessons during their entire conversation. Maybe this was something else he was trying to teach him? So, Izuku steeled his resolve and proceeded to eat the entire fruit, stem and core included, until nothing was left. Even as he swallowed the final mouthful, Izuku greedily put his fingers in his mouth, and licked them to not miss the fruit's juices. Izuku nearly hurled, but he kept it inside of him and continued speed walking. He waited to see if he would feel any different, but he didn't. He wondered what it was that the bearded man tried to teach him. Yet again, he might have just been overthinking things, Izuku thought. Maybe the fruit indeed was just a gift. It looked expensive. Maybe the man thought it was a good gift because of its price? If so, Izuku felt extra bad for having eaten it without thinking further about where the man might have possibly stolen it. Izuku stopped himself. He realized that he had started mumbling again. It wasn't good to overthink it. He had just had something really good happen in his life for once. He should appreciate it. Another explosion rang out in the streets. This time Izuku had to cover his ears because of the sheer strength of the explosion. Then, after looking ahead for the first time in a while, Izuku saw a large crowd that had formed at a turn on the sidewalk. Joining the large group, the Greenette finally saw the site of the villain attack. Around the villain that Izuku recognized as the very one that had attacked earlier before he met All Might were multiple heroes. Death Arms, Kimui Woods, MT Lady, etc. Izuku was getting excited at the prospect of analyzing the quirks of so many heroes and of villains. But his excitement turned to worry as he saw that all the heroes were doing absolutely nothing. Izuku's breath quickened. Why were they not helping? But, as he thought about it, Izuku realized that there was probably nothing they could do to help. MT Lady couldn't come in and attack the villain because the street was too small, and the rest of the heroes present probably did not have the power or the quirk necessary to be able to defeat the sludge villain. It took a punch from All Might to put the villain out of commission, after all. Izuku sighed in frustration. They still could run in there and try to help, somehow. Izuku had heard the chatter amongst the crowd and knew that inside the villain was a kid being held hostage. He felt bad for whoever it was. He knew how it felt to be attacked by the villain, how it felt to have all of your senses be invaded by that sludge. Izuku advanced further into the crowd, trying to get to the front to see who it was, but at the halfway point, he no longer needed to be up close to know who was being held hostage. Izuku's childhood friend/bully, Katsuki Bakugo, scram out in anger at the villain, ordering him to free him from his gooey binds. But, before he could scream and yell out any other demands, the villain quickly shut him up by covering his mouth with his own, blocking the blonde's airways and making him choke on the villain's viscous substance. Katsuki's and Izuku's eyes met at that moment. He could see the pleading in them, the fear. Before he knew it, Izuku pushed right through the crowd, ran past Death Arms, and then began running full speed toward the sludge villain. For some odd reason, even though the fire around him was reasonably far away from him, enough so that he shouldn't be hurt by it, Izuku felt an unbearable amount of heat around him. It felt like his skin was melting off of his muscle tissue. Despite that, however, Izuku pushed through and tried to weave his way away from the flames so they wouldn't hurt so badly. He didn't know what was going on, why he was feeling more pain than he thought he'd be supposed to, but he ignored that thought for now in favor of saving Kachin. Finally, as he got within a few meters, Izuku remembered the contents of one of his older notebooks, grabbed the straps of his backpack and threw it at the villain's eyes, his school materials flying out of it as it flew at him. Luckily, Izuku hit his mark and the villain flinched at the sudden rough contact with his eye, causing his sludge to momentarily remove itself from Katsuki's face. Seizing the opportunity, Izuku began clawing at the sludge with mad fervor, coughing out and desperately trying to get air into his lungs again. Katsuki looked toward his savior and noticed it was his childhood friend turned victim. In sheer shock and confusion, the teenager yelled out at him, "What the hell are you doing here, you idiot?" As he continued clawing, Izuku took in Katsuki's question and began questioning himself. Why was he there? At first thought, Izuku believed that he had run in because he couldn't just watch his childhood friend die, but no, it was part of it, sure, but Izuku felt that it ran further than just that. There was a reason why he was doing what he was doing, and it wasn't just selflessly wanting to save his friend. Deep down, Izuku realized that this is where he wanted to be, not for Katsuki, not for the crowd around them, not for the media, not for the heroes, but for himself. Izuku started to smile. He was chasing his dream like the homeless man had said he should. He was giving it his all, despite the pain he felt because of the fire around him and despite the fact he might die at the hands of the villain. The two boys' eyes met again, and Izuku spoke with a new fire in his eyes despite the tears that were beginning to stream down his face. I'm, I'm here because of me, Kachin. Katsuki was confused at what the greenette had said. What was he talking about? I want to be the next #1 hero. I want to inspire people just by them looking at me, just like All Might does. I want to save people like he does. That is my dream, Kachin, and I'm never going to let anyone hold me back from chasing it ever again. You hear me? Ever again. I'm here to chase my dream. His words were laced with fury and determination. They would have shaken Katsuki to his core if he wasn't currently in a near-death situation because of the villain holding him hostage. As the two continued looking at each other, and as Izuku continued trying to pry the sludge away from his friend, Katsuki began to notice something strange happening to Izuku. Slowly, a thin layer of some strange substance began to be produced from Izuku's skin, something dark and gaseous-like. Izuku followed his friend's eyes and looked at where he was looking, causing him to halt his clawing for a brief moment. A thin layer became a thick miasma covering his arms, and, as Katsuki followed the spreading of the black substance, he saw that the entirety of Izuku's back was being invaded by a large cloud of darkness. Their shock at Izuku's condition was short-lived, however, because before any of them could comment on the strange substance being produced by Izuku, the young student was smashed into the ground by the sludge villain's giant slimy arm. Damn brat, you're not going to mess things up for me. From far away, All Might, who had been watching the whole ordeal and had desired to jump in but couldn't because of his lack of time left in Gi's buff form, gasped in horror at what had just happened. Without thinking, the hero transformed back into his buff form despite the pain that it caused him and decided he'd jump in to save the two young boys being held hostage by the sludge villain. Yet as he prepared himself to jump in and save the day, he was halted by a most strange sight. The villain, who had previously been dark swamp greenish in color, was now composed of completely void black sludge. The villain didn't seem to notice this fact at first and was more perturbed by the sight of All Might amongst the shocked crowd. But eventually one of his appendages caught his eye, and he stared at them in shock. What? What the hell? Then, slowly, the miasma that had been seen on Izuku began to rise from the villain's sludge and into a massive plume of smoke rising into the sky, which seemed to turn even the clouds a darker sheen of gray. The villain tried to move, to shake the dark substance off of him, but he failed. For some reason, he was completely unable to move from his spot, stuck to the ground, as if some invisible force was pulling him down and anchoring him to the ground. Trying to look at his base to see what was going on, he was met with the dark miasma once again, except this time it was creeping and spreading to the ground in a circle radius around him. The circle began to get bigger and bigger, and, eventually, it reached some nearby rubble and consumed it. As the darkness finally reached the nearby buildings, everybody in the crowd felt as the structures shook and began to be pulled into it. All Might's heart dropped. Whatever was going on was not good at all. All Might jumped to the forefront of the crowd, where the darkness was approaching further, and began to yell, "Heroes, evacuate all surrounding citizens. Now!" All of the heroes around the area listened to the symbol of peace's order and proceeded to start the evacuation of the crowds that had formed. The crowds, who were already scared of the creeping dark substance approaching them, did not hesitate to follow the order. After a while, and despite the general panic that the populace was in, almost every citizen who had a view of the street had all run out of sight. Those who were being saved from the destruction of the nearby buildings had already started being carried to safety by backdraft and other heroes long before the darkness had appeared, so the sudden appearance of the cloud of darkness had only sped up the process. All Might now stood wearily in front of a petrified villain and a growing plague of darkness steadily coming even closer to him. He hadn't any great ideas as to what he should do. He couldn't come anywhere close. Touching the darkness would mean getting absorbed, and his ranged attacks were far too powerful. They'd likely injure the hostage and damage the body of the unfortunate teenager who had recklessly tried to run in and save the day. Testing out an idea, the hero reared back a punch and threw it at the darkness, only for it to have no effect. It seemed that the miasma had even absorbed the shock of his punch. All Might began to seriously worry. Looking at the source of the darkness, the hero tried to find a way to solve this dilemma. only to see something even stranger. In place of the scared villain and the two hostages, the hero now saw a large naked rotund man being grabbed by the throat and shoved to the ground by a person who was covered head to toe in the darkness that was spreading around the area and whose clothes and back seemed to even be transforming into it. Next to him, the symbol of peace also witnessed that the first hostage that had been taken was lying on the miasma, free of harm, and being held by the darkness-clad being by the forearm. Looking closer, All Might was shocked to see that the person grabbing the fat man by the throat was the child who had run in to save the first hostage. The darkness made it extremely hard to see, but it was indeed him. The dark school uniform with the dark gold buttons, the unkempt greenish hair, the red shoes. All Might had recognized those characteristics when he had seen him jump into danger. "And my quirk? What happened to my quirk? What have you done?" The green-haired boy holding him didn't respond. Instead, he stood there dumbfounded at what was going on. Of course, All Might guessed that the cause of what was happening was Izuku. The darkness seemed to seep from him and into his surroundings. The hero tried to find a way to approach, but each time he attempted to take a step toward the scene, he felt something pull at his body, pulling him into the darkness, so he always backed off. He would have to bide his time and retreat each time it got close for now. Izuku began hyperventilating. He didn't know what was going on and was starting to get scared. What was this dark stuff covering him? Did he finally manifest his quirk? What had happened to the villain's sludge? Seeing an opening caused by Izuku's confusion, the fat man who Izuku was grabbing reared his fist back and hit him directly in his jaw, causing Izuku to stumble back, release his hold on both him and Katsuki, and to scream out bloody murder. He couldn't describe the pain he was going through. Why was it hurting so much? Even if the villain who had inexplicably lost the use of his quirk was a fully grown man, his punch shouldn't have hurt nearly as much as it did. To Izuku, it felt like the man had punched his jaw clean off. Backing away from Izuku and somehow not being absorbed by the darkness on the ground, the man started to regain control of his quirk and began turning into sludge again, to his great relief. The man's voice slowly started to sound more gurgly as he talked and reverted back to his sludge form. "I don't know what the hell that was, you damn pipsqueak, but..." The villain launched his whole body at Izuku. "I ain't letting it happen again." As the villain threw himself at a darkness engulfed Izuku, who was rubbing his sore jaw after the strike he had received, the young boy looked up at him, a shadow covering his eyes. Izuku found himself feeling different, as if something had taken control of his senses. Izuku felt intense anger and hate, like all of the dark feelings he had ever felt were just now coming to light and demanding he do something to appease them. Even toward the worst of his bullies, Izuku had not felt this kind of anger and dislike, but now, he truly felt like he wanted to harm the villain. He wanted him to hurt worse than he was hurting right now. With those dark feelings coursing through his mind, body, and soul, Izuku jumped toward the villain while rearing back a darkness-covered fist. Once the two men were a meter away from each other, Izuku's fist suddenly began to do something strange. What could only be described as a vortex appeared on and around Izuku's fist, causing a spiral of darkness to be produced from his hand, which seemed to pull the villain toward it. At a blinding speed, the villain's trajectory changed, and he was pulled right into the trajectory of Izuku's punch, increasing the damage caused by it because of the increase in kinetic force caused by the increase in velocity. As he felt himself being pulled irresistibly toward Izuku's fist, the sludge villain arrogantly assumed that he wouldn't feel a thing because of his quirk, but he was proven wrong by his face materializing as Izuku's fist intercepted him. Then, the darkness on the ground below began doing the same thing Izuku's fist did, causing another vortex to appear. The villain was roughly pulled to the ground, causing the ground itself to crack under the impact of his body and causing the air to be completely expelled from his lungs. Gasping for air, the villain lay there, slowly turning back into his sludge form again and looking at Izuku, standing over him with eyes that pleaded for mercy. Without thinking, and despite the pain that radiated from his now broken fist, Izuku began approaching the villain with an angry scowl on his face. Once he was right next to the villain lying on the ground, Izuku brought his foot up to his chest, another vortex appearing on his soul, and then slammed it down on the villain's own, forcing him back into his solid form. The villain gasped in pain as Izuku trampled him underfoot. At a low volume, low enough so that only Katsuki and the villain could hear it. Izuku laughed at the villain he had rendered under his heel and then sighed in what seemed like relief. It was a different laugh than his usual jovial and innocent one. It was deeper and throatier. It felt unnatural for it to be coming out of the usually kind brunette. Izuku smirked slightly. At that moment, Izuku felt a true sense of satisfaction. He didn't know why, but what he was doing felt right, good, even. To Izuku, having the villain he only held contempt for under his shoe felt oddly pleasurable. These feelings, although they felt nice to him, confused Izuku. This wasn't who he was. This was far from anything he'd ever thought he'd do yet. He was doing this without even thinking about it, like it was completely natural. Why was he doing this? Had he always wanted to do these kinds of things, deep down? But his enjoyment was cut short as the villain grabbed Izuku's foot in anger and squeezed it with all the might he had left. Izuku howled out in pain, his new extra-sensitive pain receptors rearing their ugly faces once again. Izuku's eyes shot open with ferocity and anger overtaking his instincts. He was about to raise his foot and smash him back into the ground, but instead of that, something strange happened. The cloud of darkness on Izuku's back suddenly enlarged and out of it shot tendril-like plumes of darkness that quickly enveloped the villain. Before Izuku could even understand what had happened, the tendrils retreated back, and the villain was gone. No trace of him was left at all. Izuku snapped back to reality, stammered for a second, and looked around to try to figure out what had happened and where the villain had gone. It was then that Izuku truly took notice of the destruction of everything around him. He had been so preoccupied with his strange new feelings and quirk and with the villain attacking him that he had blocked out all of the damage being caused around him. Even now, he saw buildings being sucked into his still-growing circle of darkness. Izuku began panicking. He hadn't realized that his power had been doing all of this. Had anyone been hurt? Had anyone else died? More importantly, however, how the hell could he turn this thing off? Young man. Izuku jerked his head toward the source of the booming voice. It was All Might. Please, turn your quirk off. You are putting people in danger. Izuku frantically looked at his hands and then back to All Might. I don't know how. The hero stood there, befuddled. How had someone of his age not learned how to use his quirk yet? All Might turned his head to another building crumbling nearby. He'd have to teach the boy how to take control of his quirk, and fast. Bringing up his hands to his mouth in hopes of making his voice louder, so Izuku could hear him over the chaos surrounding them, the hero yelled again. Think of it like a muscle. You need to let go. To relax it, visualize your quirk and make it unflex itself. Izuku looked at the hero with worry. The instructions that were given to him weren't the clearest. He'd have to give it a go, however, or else something horrible he didn't even want to think about might happen. Closing his eyes, Izuku tried to imagine his quirk as something tangible, as something he could understand. In his mind, Izuku pictured his quirk as a simple ball of darkness pulling in objects around it. Now with a clear picture in his head, Izuku began taking in deep breaths and then slowly breathing out while imagining the ball in his head becoming smaller and ceasing its absorption of everything around it. With his mind and body now calm, Izuku slowly and tentatively opened his eyes to see if it had worked. Luckily, it had. The spread of the darkness stopped dead in its tracks before it could do any more damage and began to quickly creep back into its point of origin. When Izuku absorbed the last of the darkness that had spread to the ground, his body began to revert to normal too. The darkness enveloping his body began to evaporate into thin air, and the cloud on his back too disappeared. Checking his entire body to make sure nothing had been missed and that his quirk truly had been turned off, Izuku sighed in relief. All of the darkness was finally gone. Looking around, however, Izuku's heart dropped as he saw the extent of the damage. In a large circle around him, everything had been erased, eradicated. The small street they were previously in was now completely gone. Burst and ripped apart pipes stuked straight out of the dirt and foundations and sprayed water all around where the shops and building once stood. Wires sparked while hanging out of holes where pole lights previously were erected. Even beyond the alleyway, the darkness had crept into neighboring streets and had absorbed parts of some buildings. Where the miasma had stopped, buildings it had begun consuming but hadn't had the time to completely devour now stood half destroyed with bits of rebar, concrete, and bricks falling now and then onto the floor below. All that was left now was the street he stood on. Hearing something moving beside him, Izuku turned his head toward Katsuki, standing up a few meters away from him. The two stared at each other silently for a few seconds, neither knowing what to say. Izuku swallowed uncomfortably, then opened his mouth to say something to the blonde, but was interrupted as large thumping footsteps approached the duo. All Might stood in front of them, his figure shadowed because of the fact he was standing in front of their view of the sun. Izuku looked nervously toward the hero. He wore his usual heroic smile, but something was off about it, like it hid something else. Izuku noticed that his eyes revealed what he must have been feeling. They were serious and held a great deal of concern and reprimand to them. From All Might's point of view, he was hit with a sudden wave of confusion. Now that he had a clear view of the face of the source of the darkness that had destroyed the street that had previously existed, he recognized him as the very child who had, little less than an hour ago, seen him in his small form. He recalled the question he had asked him, if he could become a hero even if he was quirkless. He had answered him no, of course. The job of a hero is a dangerous one. It would have been irresponsible for him to say that he could. Without a quirk, he could easily get himself hurt, or even worse, killed. As he looked around, however, it was made apparent to him that the reality of things was the other way around. The hero now questioned the point of the question he had asked him if he already seemed to have a more than adequately potent quirk. The greenette truly did not seem to have even the most basic handle on his quirk, however, so maybe there was something else at play. It was technically possible for him to be a late bloomer, though he would be a completely unprecedented example of the affliction. No limit to the age up to which someone can achieve before manifesting one's quirk had ever been officially documented. So although it was unbelievably rare, it was feasible for him to have just that day have manifested his quirk in his moment of crisis. Even if that were the case, it would be of no help to the boy's case. Damage resulted from a lack of control of one's quirk could be pardoned if one had just manifested it for the first time in their life. But the boy's actions were a different story. All Might had seen what he had done to the villain, the way he fought him. His actions, his attacks against the villain, they were purely done out of anger and spite against the pile of sludge. His aim was not to save the hostage. It wasn't to help in defending him further, and it wasn't to protect the people around either. Instead, it was to harm the villain who had tried to kill him. Pure retaliation, no heroic instinct whatsoever. At first, it did seem that his body had moved before he had time to think the same way the ones of true heroes do, but once he manifested his quirk, it was like something changed. The boy stamped on the villain to further worsen the injury he had given him and to make himself feel superior to him. Not only that, but the moment the greenette met the slightest bit of resistance from his already subjugated foe, he simply decided to kill him. That could not be excused or ignored. Someone had died because of his reckless actions. The hero had an obligation to make the severity of his actions known to him. "Young man," the hero began, in a grave and solemn tone, "we need to talk." Izuku stayed silent, waiting with bated breath for what the hero had to say. In his heart, he hoped to be praised. He hoped that All Might would change the answer he had given him before. He knew his saving of Katsuki wasn't ideal, but at least he had been saved. He hoped that would be enough for the hero. "What you did today was unacceptable." Izuku's heart dropped. "What?" "Look around you. Have you any idea of the damage you've caused? Of the businesses and families you've harmed because of your recklessness?" "Recklessness? I saved someone's life. Kachin could have died if I hadn't done something. The heroes weren't even doing anything to help him. They were biding their time to find a way to rescue him safely. Their quirks could not allow that. They were doing the right thing." Izuku couldn't believe what he was hearing. He could have died, and you say it was good for them to be doing nothing? They could have helped. They could have done anything but stand there and watch. And that is my next point. Your attitude, too, cannot be excused. The way you were acting out there, it was completely unheroic. You said your dream is to become a hero, yet you act more like the villain you executed. The way you attacked that villain, The way you killed him. Heroes are supposed to protect people, not harm them. I. I understand that what happened to the villain is horrible, but I've never had a quirk before. I didn't mean T-dash. All Might closed his eyes in irritation and raised his hand to halt the greenette. Please, save me the excuses. I need you to understand what your irresponsibility has done. You killed someone today. There are consequences to that. There is no good reason for you to have done what you did and for you to have acted the way you did. Izuku didn't respond. He balled his hands into tight fists until his knuckles turned white, and he pitched his head down, causing a shadow to cover his eyes. All Might sighed sadly and turned to look behind him. With the spreading of the darkness stopped, the crowds were beginning to return alongside the police and heroes. A group comprised of policemen and a few heroes were approaching them, and a handful of reporters followed behind them. All Might turned back to Izuku, who still had his fist balled tightly. Izuku gritted his teeth together. He was trying not to cry, but was failing to do so. Tears began streaming down his face and to the ground. You will be taken into the custody of the Mizutofu Police Department. Indeed, you couldn't be expected to completely control your quirk if you've just manifested it today, and self-defense could be argued for your killing of the villain, so you are unlikely to face any legal repercussions. But maybe some time with them will give you some time to think about what you've done today and get you to change. All Might stepped closer to Izuku and placed a hand on his shoulder. Listen, you might have a quirk, but that doesn't mean you instantly can become a hero. With your attitude and your lack of control over your quirk and emotions, you are unlikely to ever be able to. I suggest you follow my advice and think of another career path. Get your hand off of me, Izuku retorted sharply, causing All Might to reluctantly remove his hand from the greenette. Izuku stepped back from the symbol of peace and wiped his eyes of his tears. Rearing his head up to stare at the hero, it could be seen that his eyes had changed. Their intensity, for the smallest of moments, actually gave All Might a feeling of dread. They now held something different within them. Throughout his few interactions with the boy, All Might had seen hope, fear, worry, and happiness in his eyes, but now, he saw that they held a dark amount of resentment to them. All my life, I waited for someone to believe in me, to tell me that I could achieve my dream. You were supposed to be that person. You are the symbol of peace, the man I've looked up to since my earliest childhood. I wasn't strong enough before, but I have my quirk now, and yet you still don't believe in me. Izuku snickered sadly. It's funny, a homeless man believed in me today. He gave me hope. And you, number one hero that you are, Izuku sneered, are incapable of that. I wouldn't have believed myself capable of it until today, but from this day on, I hate you. Izuku stepped closer to All Might and looked up at him, defying him by staring dead into his eyes. I don't need you anymore. I don't need anyone's belief anymore. Keep looking down at me. Keep telling me that my dream is crap. I don't care anymore. You're not worth my effort. A small bit of darkness began rising from Izuku's body as his anger and resentment grew. I am going to be the next number one hero, and there's nothing you could say or do that'll stop me. I will surpass you, you bastard. You know why? Izuku squeezed his fists together even tighter. Because my dream will never end, understand? Never. The darkness rising from Izuku increased, causing All Might to worry. Izuku saw this and calmly closed his eyes to calm down and turned the darkness off. His quirk now inactive once again. Izuku didn't spare another word to the symbol of peace and simply shoved his way past and away from him before he could utter a word. All Might turned around to see where he was going, only to see him ignoring and walking past other heroes who were berating him for his actions while photos were being taken of him by journalists. Arriving in front of a few police officers preparing to take him into custody, two approached to grab him by the shoulders, wanting to guide him toward a police van where he'd be restrained by quirk-dampening cuffs. Before they could start walking, however, Izuku shook them off of him, declaring that he was able to walk on his own. The officers, not wanting him to activate his quirk again and being slightly scared of the dark aura he exuded, complied and simply walked with him past the parted crowd toward the police van. All Might, having seen enough, turned around to look at the still shaken hostage who was being tended to by MT Lady. It appeared that he too had been looking at Izuku walking away, except his eyes had stayed on the greenette. After being done with him, the heroine turned her head to All Might and approached him. All Might, sir. No casualties have been reported. Everyone seemed to have got out in time. That's good, but not everyone survived. Huh? What do you owe? MT Lady looked around. Right? I can't see the villain anywhere. What happened to him? Did he get absorbed? Unfortunately, yes. The child being taken away had him under his foot. The villain grabbed his leg, and then that dark substance enveloped and devoured him. My God, so all of this was that kid over there's quirk. Yes. Good Lord, that's ridiculous. That kid's got one hell of a strong quirk. Yes, he has. MT Lady tilted her head and looked at the hero with worry. I'm sorry if I'm overstepping boundaries, sir, but are you all right? You look perturbed. HM? Oh, I'm sorry. All Might sighed. I scolded him once he turned off his quirk and I was able to approach. We didn't end on a good note, as I'm sure you heard. Yeah, he was screaming about his dream or something, right? Yes, All Might said as he turned and looked toward a restrained Izuku hopping into a police van. And I'm worried I started something I shouldn't have. What do you mean? All Might turned back to MT Lady. I don't know. I've just got this weird gut feeling. That child's got a villainous quirk, a dark temperament, and he wants to become a hero. Because of what he demonstrated today, I thought it wise to suggest he give up, but that might have just motivated him more. Well, if I might interject, sir, isn't it good that he wants to be a hero? Better a hero than a villain, no? All Might hummed. Maybe, I'm not sure. Now he seems more like a danger to others than anything else. HM, well, let's hope he'll learn something from today and come out of it better, no? Yes, let's hope. All Might stumbled. He was taxing himself, and he was running out of time. I'm sorry, I need to leave now. Thank you for your help. You have a great career ahead of you. MT Lady thanked All Might for his compliment, but it never reached the hero's ears, who jumped away from the scene too fast for him to have heard it. Landing on top of some empty roof and falling to his knees, All Might finally reverted to his small form, to his great relief. Rolling onto his backside and sitting with his back toward a wall, All Might sighed. He hoped that the new hero, MT Lady, was right. Maybe that boy could learn from his bad experience and come out of it a better person and someone who could be a hero despite his dangerous quirk. Somehow, though, All Might doubted that that would be the case. That child's aura was oddly dark, like that of a villain's, especially toward the end of their exchange. He felt that, if unchecked, that boy could become something dark and fearsome. Izuku sat in a dimly lit barred cell, his hand resting in a cast. The police officers who had detained him had noticed the state of the hand he used to punch the sludge villain with. So a trip to the hospital was deemed necessary before he was to be transported to the Mizudafu police station. Luckily, the pain had all but disappeared. But for a while, Izuku could do nothing but bear with it, as it felt like the bits of bone that he had broken off of his fourth and fifth metacarpal were bits of glass or razors cutting into the inside of his hand. It felt like hours had passed since the fight with the swamp green-hued villain, but Izuku could not know the exact amount of time that had elapsed since. His stay in the cell he was in did not include a clock. If he had to guess, Izuku would say it was evening. Despite the time that had elapsed since then, during which he had the opportunity to think about the affair, Izuku was still nevertheless distraught about what had happened. He still felt the sting of his ex-idol letting him down again, and it only served to make his resentment of the man grow. Further than that, his newfound quirk also worried him. Activating it so only his hand was covered in darkness, he stared at the substance in both curiosity and worry. It felt good to have a quirk of his own finally. Maybe now people at school would finally stop making fun of him. Maybe Kachin would finally lay off him too. Unfortunately, he knew that that was only wishful thinking. In all likelihood, he would only be ostracized even further. Being quirkless was one thing, but having a quirk that is seen as villainous is another matter entirely. Being quirkless warrants you a fair share of distrust and rejection, but at the heart of it, people only perceive you as less than them, as a nobody. Having a quirk that caused as much devastation as his did, however, warranted you far more. Izuku remembered a kid who used to attend his school when he was younger, right around when he was 8, who could make someone hallucinate their greatest fears. People feared his quirk, and because of that, for the short amount of time he was there before the bullying made him move away, Izuku wasn't the most bullied kid in school. He couldn't attest to it personally, but Izuku had heard rumors from conversations he heard his mom having over the phone that teachers and members of faculty would often turn a blind eye to the mistreatment the boy received. Having a villainous quirk meant people were afraid, sometimes even disgusted, of you. It meant that people would feel the need to put you down to calm their fears. It meant only trouble would be in his future. That fact filled Izuku with worry. He dreaded the reception he would receive once he inevitably returned to school in what would probably be a short amount of time. Izuku turned off his quirk and sighed, drooping his shoulders and rubbing his face in frustration. As if that wasn't enough, yet another thing worried him: what his quirk had done to him. Other than his newfound sensitivity to pain, he also felt entirely unnatural during his fight with the villain he had killed. What that might entail filled his heart with concern. Izuku would be the first to admit he wasn't a perfect person. He had wanted to be like All Might, a hero who doesn't feel things like fear, worry, hate, or anger. But as good of a person as he was, and as well as he meant, Izuku had felt dark emotions such as them before. True, in the past, he had transformed the rejection, disbelief, and bullying he received from his peers into motivation to prove them wrong, which was something positive. But he would be lying if he claimed that those things had never made him feel angry or bitter. He often stuffed those kinds of negative emotions deep in his heart and bottled them up. It was unbecoming of someone who wanted to be a hero to feel that way, even more to want to act upon them. Yet, during that fight, it was scary, even in the moment despite how clouded he was by his emotions. It was as if every single one of his dark emotions and desires were being increased tenfold and had begun clawing away at his psyche with fervor they had never had in the past. Why had he felt this way? Izuku wasn't a stranger to anger and resentment, but he had been able to manage and ignore those feelings even from a most tender age. So why had they so roughly and totally taken control of him? In Izuku's mind, he had only one explanation: his quirk. It was the only thing in his life and about him that had changed, really. The homeless man he had met prior to the fight had made him feel different about his life and had rejuvenated the fire within his heart, sure. But Izuku couldn't see a way how that would have made his emotions change so drastically. His quirk, though, was an element so unpredictable that it just might be the cause of his sudden personality change. A quirk was similar to puberty, in a way. It's something that changes your body in its integrality, and with that meant a possibility of change in your hormones or brain chemistry, which might have been what led to his wild emotional swing. It could even potentially explain his sensitive pain receptors. His quirk gave him control and allowed him to produce or turn into. Izuku could not exactly tell yet. What could only be described as darkness. So, if his quirk was centered around this darkness, maybe it took his dark emotions and turned them up to 11? It felt thematic, he thought. Izuku removed his hands from his face, looked past his cell's bars, and sighed once more. His theory had flaws. If he worked off of the same logic he came up with, it wouldn't explain his pain sensitivity. Why would darkness make him more sensitive to pain? It didn't matter anyways. He had no way of even telling if he was right. He would need the expertise of his quirk doctor if he ever wanted to truly find out if he was. So, for now, he could only wait. Suddenly, Izuku heard a commotion coming from his right, towards the room's entrance. He could hear the heavy door he had crossed when he first arrived be opened, closed shut with a heavy thud, and then locked once again with a resounding click. After that, he heard footsteps approaching his cell. The footsteps were quite odd, he'd have to say. They sounded light, yet they also sounded like whoever was walking was wearing quite a large shoe. He could also hear the rhythmic rubbing of fabric against itself, like if the person approaching was wearing a large winter coat. Finally, as the source of the footsteps came into view and stopped right in front of his holding cell, Izuku was surprised to see a particular hero wearing an outfit with a similar look to that of an astronaut suit. This was 13, the space hero. Izuku found her presence here quite odd. He knew that even for a hero she was quite a busy person, Being part of the faculty of UA would do that. So, if that was the case, why was she here? Instinctively, Izuku frowned, probably causing a slight bit of surprise from 13's point of view. If his interactions with heroes that day told him anything, it was likely he was going to be berated for his actions yet again. If you're here to lecture me, you can stuff it. I've heard enough for today. Just leave me alone. Not particularly chatty, huh? Izuku scoffed and retorted with venom. Sorry, having your idol crush your dreams twice in an hour and getting arrested for attempting to help someone in danger does tend to do that to someone. Rude too. Izuku, beginning to get tired of her, got up and hastily walked to the bars of his cell to stare directly at her helmet, where he guessed the eyes of the hero were. What do you want? 13, without another word, methodically reached into one of her outfit's pockets, produced a small card from it, and handed it to Izuku, who took it with his unbroken hand. On the card, Izuku could see a photo of 13 in her hero outfit, her hero name, a few other identifying bits of info, and a phone number near the middle. That, coupled with the overall design of the card, which was noticeably space and astronaut-themed, made Izuku guess that this was 13's business card. On there is the number to my agency, where you can possibly reach me or leave a message for me if I'm unable to be contacted on this phone number. As she finished her sentence, 13 pulled out something else from another of her suit's pockets and handed it to Izuku, just as she did with her business card. It was a scrap of paper, one that seemed to have been ripped from a notebook of some sort and then hastily crumpled up. Looking up at the hero in confusion and distrust, Izuku furrowed his brows. What is this? I came here in a rush. It was the closest thing to me that I could write on. Open it, and you'll see what it is. With hesitation, Izuku laid his eyes on the scrap of paper once again and tentatively began uncrumpling it. As he straightened the small page of paper out, he was finally able to make out another sequence of numbers, a phone number, one different from the one that was printed on 13's business card. Izuku looked back at the hero. Is this yours? Yes, it is. It's the number to my personal phone. Izuku couldn't understand what the hero in front of him was attempting to do, nor why. I don't understand. Why are you giving me all of this? Because I want to help you. Izuku had trouble believing his ears. He had not lost hope in heroes as a whole, but every single one he had interacted with that day had had a sour opinion of him, so the benevolent hand 13 was presumably handing him was doubtful. Izuku felt himself back up from the hero involuntarily. He didn't want to expose his heart to someone like he did with All Might only to have it ripped to shreds yet again. 13, taking notice of Izuku's retreat, brought a hand up and gestured in an appeasing motion. You can trust me, young man. If you'd allow me, I can tell you why I want to help. Slowly and hesitatingly, Izuku nodded his head. Thank you. I learned of the incident you caused earlier today while I was still at UA High. I had heard many students gossiping about you. I admit, it piqued my interest. So, I decided to watch the news broadcast regarding it. It was less than favorable as to your image. However, I saw the photos and the few recordings that were taken of you, and what I saw in your demeanor, to me, did not match up with what was being said on the news, so I decided to dig deeper. I called up my agency. They have access to incident reports and allowed me to review the one All Might made. The name made the greenette's blood pressure rise for a short moment. Suddenly, Izuku interrupted the hero and approached her once more. All Might. 13, surprised by the sudden interruption, took a second to respond. Yes, All Might. What did he say? From Izuku's point of view, the hero's silence spoke volumes. Izuku felt his heartbeat become faster as he began to see red at the thought of what All might have said about him in his incident report. What did he say? 13 begrudgingly produced a small electronic phone from one of her pockets, turned it on, and after tapping away at it for a moment, turned it toward Izuku. I can't show you official documents. Only certain people are allowed access to those. I can, however, show you this. Izuku peered into the phone's screen and saw that 13 was showing him the very broadcast that had covered the incident he had caused. In big bold letters at the very bottom of the screen, below some reporters talking, he could see, "Teenage boy terrorizes and destroys local street." Izuku, with teeth now gritting together in anger, gripped his cell's bars tightly and continued listening to the reporters talking about him. The broadcast detailed the events that transpired earlier that day, showcasing many pictures and videos of him all the while. Izuku was irritated at his depiction, the way they were showing him, the pictures they had chosen, the words they used to describe him, his quirk, and what he had done. While it never outright called him a villain, it certainly alluded to it. Even if they knew the sludge villain had taken Katsuki hostage, not even once did they mention how he might have saved his life. They were painting him as the villain in the situation. Him, the boy who thought he was risking his own life, trying to save someone else's, the boy who was just trying to follow his dream. Most irking of all, however, was the fact that All Might had had a phone interview with some journalist. His account, it was more than vexing, more than irritating, more than insulting, more than all of that. It was vile, scornful, downright repulsive, at least from Izuku's point of view. Maybe with a clearer mind and a more neutral disposition, one might find his words to have been fairer or more just. But, to Izuku, he could feel biting intention behind each one of the words he heard quoted from All Might's report. The boy executed the villain in anger. He willed his darkness to cover and devour him for the sole reason that the villain grabbed his leg. It was completely unheroic, maybe even villainous. That part in particular made Izuku's blood boil. A shadow covered Izuku's eyes. The fire of hate and anger within his heart began to grow once again. His ex-idol had yet again crossed him. He had given the press the idea that he was some villain. Izuku wished he could be surprised, but he no longer felt it to be surprising. He was starting to expect such actions from the blonde hero. Izuku's knuckles turned white as his grip on the cell's metal bars tightened further. Darkness began to cover his arms and overtake the bars he was holding. Just slightly, he began shaking, being barely able to contain his anger for the hero. That bastard," Izuku said, in a low and hoarse tone. "I've never had a quirk before. I didn't do it on purpose. Why can't he see that?" The darkness spread further as his emotions became more and more volatile, eventually making it so most of his cell was covered in darkness, causing 13 to back away and begin sweating in worry. They were doing nothing. Izuku yelled as he shook his cell's bars. "Without me, Kachin would have died. I'm not the villain here." Izuku's cell was now completely covered in a smoky miasma of darkness, and, with one final and resounding lungful of air, the darkness-wielding greenette let out a loath-filled cry. "I hate him." As he gave one final big push on the bars, he fell on his face as they disintegrated in his hands, and he fell through them, causing him to yell out in pain. Turning himself around, while still on the floor so he could see what had happened, his heart stopped as he witnessed his quirk going to work. Slowly, the darkness seemed to be absorbing the cell and was even beginning to creep into others next to it, which made other prisoners swear in surprise at the sudden arrival of the darkness. Quickly getting up and throwing his darkness-covered arms at the darkness threatening to consume the police department's holding cells, Izuku desperately yelled out a command. "Stop!" Luckily, the darkness obeyed, and as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished and dissipated into the air. Izuku was left panting like a madman and rubbing the painful spot on his head he had landed on. For a short moment as he landed on his cranium, it had felt as if a pickaxe was being driven into his head. What was left now was a completely barren and dark room. Luckily, his quirk had only consumed the cell's door, bars, furnishings, and light source affixed to the ceiling, leaving only the 3 concrete walls. Izuku turned to look at 13 as he heard her coming closer to him. Looking into the dark-tinted glass of her helmet, it unsettled Izuku that he was completely unable to read what emotion she was feeling. Was she judging him? Was she going to scold him like All Might did now that she saw firsthand what his quirk could do? What was she thinking? "Oh look, I didn't mean to. I swear, you have to believe Dash." "I know." "Huh." 13 turned to look at the destroyed cell and sighed. "I shouldn't have shown you that video. I didn't know it would affect you so badly. I apologize for that." Suddenly, Policemen burst into the room with weapons drawn. 13, thinking fast, shielded Izuku with her body and brought her arms out, signaling them not to shoot. Please, lay down your guns. I have everything under control. This is all my fault. This young man lost control of his quirk because of me. Please just let him be transferred to another cell. I will pay for all the damages he's caused. The policemen present were reluctant to listen to the space hero. But, eventually, one after the other, they all decided to comply with the hero's demands. One, presumably a lieutenant or whoever was in charge of the group, walked up to 13 and began talking to her, while two others went to carefully grab Izuku, who was looking dejected. Izuku saw and heard 13 defend him. She was indeed able to convince the lieutenant to leave him alone, but it wasn't without a catch. Since they didn't want to lose another cell, even if she agreed to pay for the damages of the destroyed one, the lieutenant said that Izuku would need to be in restraints. They had let him be without any because he had complied with them, but now he had broken the trust they had, so they couldn't allow him to sit in a cell again without any precautions. And so now Izuku stood in his new cell a few meters away from his old one, with big clunky straps covering his chest and pinning his arms to his side. 13, apparently having finished her talk with the group of policemen, approached his cell once again. I'm sorry they had to put you in those things. They wouldn't budge on it. Izuku didn't respond for a while, causing the two to sit in silence for what felt like hours. Why did you believe me? Excuse me? I said I didn't mean to do what I did. Every hero today has refused to even listen to what I had to say, but you do so without a shadow of a doubt. I want to know why. 13 sighed. Yes, I can explain. Like I was saying before, I saw the incident report on what happened earlier today. All Might described your quirk, which I now can say was an apt picture. He also detailed the destruction it caused and how he needed to describe and teach you how to control and deactivate it too. A detail I wish the press would have highlighted. I had doubts, but your outburst just now confirmed it for me. That was the very first time your quirk manifested, no? Yes, it was. Young man, before I was the hero I am today, I was a kid much like you. It happened to me much earlier than you, I'll admit, but the first time I manifested my quirk was not a pleasant time for me either. I remember the weather. It was a sunny July morning. I was playing with my dear pet cat, Whiskers, in the backyard of my childhood home with my mother watching over me. I was very happy. But then, fate decided that that was the day my quirk would manifest itself to disastrous effects. Do you know what my quirk is? Izuku thought about it for a second. Yeah, I wrote about it in one of my quirk analysis notebooks. It was a while ago, so I might not be 100% accurate, but I know your quirk makes it so the tip of your fingers can act like some kind of black hole. It gives you the ability to suck in and pulverize almost anything that's in front of you. Impressive, your memory's quite good. Yes, that's right. 13 extended one of her hands and flipped open one of the covers on her fingers. If I flip open these parts of my costume and activate my quirk, it pretty much will pull in anything that's in front of me. It's quite a dangerous quirk. It could hurt or even kill someone if I'm not careful. And it has. That day, while I was playing with my cat, my quirk suddenly manifested, activated, and 13 seemed to get emotional for a second. My quirk sucked him in, turned him into dust alongside parts of our backyard that were also being pulled into my fingers. My mom, luckily, rushed to my side and guided me to turn my quirk off, but the damage had already been done. Our backyard was all but destroyed and my dear pet cat was dead, all because of me. 13 closed her finger cover, backed up from the cell, and leaned her back on the wall behind her. The following years were tough. I lost most of my friends following the manifestation of my quirk. Word got around that I had killed my cat, so people began to be scared of me. I pulled through all of that and became a hero. Yes, but I couldn't count the amount of times I pondered giving up. If I went nowhere with my life and somehow ended up at the end of my rope, it was a likelihood that I might have become a villain, out to do whatever I could to survive using my quirk. 13 pushed herself off the wall, approached Izuku's cell once again, and extended a hand to grab one of the bars in a similar manner to how Izuku had. I was lucky. I had my family and a few friends that stuck by me and supported me. It's because of them that I am a hero today. 13 sighed. What I'm trying to get at is that, after what I saw on the broadcast and on the report, I saw myself in you. That is why I choose to believe you. I know how it feels to be scared of your own quirk, to not know what to do, to feel like everybody's against you. I also know that at this point, you need someone to believe in you and to give you a guiding hand. If nobody does that, your future might indeed be dark. If you'd allow me, I would like to be that person for you. Our quirks are quite similar, in a way. Yours pulls things in too, right? I can teach you how you can and should use yours. I can also help you in exploring parts of your quirks that aren't like mine and warrant further thought. I understand that your recent experience might have diminished your trust in heroes. But if you would reach out to me on one of the phone numbers I've given to you, we can meet up face to face and just talk about it. I won't even be in uniform. We'll be able to talk person to person without the intermediary of me being a hero. 13 took her other hand and laid it on another bar, grasping it tightly just as she was with her other hand. I don't want you to become a villain. I don't want you to go down a dark path you can't return from. Please let me help you. Izuku pitched his head down. Slowly, a small smile began to creep itself onto Izuku's face as a few tears began rolling down his cheeks. Geez, the way you say that. I haven't lost all hope yet, you know. Izuku sniffled, trying to stop himself from crying again, and snickered. Look at me tearing up, what a crybaby. I don't think I can properly put into words how much you saying all of this means to me. Izuku approached 13. He seemed to be in a cheerier mood as he began reminiscing. You know, it wasn't all bad today. I met someone before all this happened. I never caught his name. He was a huge and homeless-looking guy I met on the sidewalk when I was trying to go see the hostage situation. He believed in my dream and told me I was able of becoming a hero even if I didn't have a quirk. He rejuvenated my hope in my dream. Do you also think I can become a hero? 13 let go of the metal bars and huffed in satisfaction. Well, it wasn't what I planned originally. I just want to steer you away from the path I almost took, but if your dream's to become a hero, then that's even better. You might think your quirk is only a detriment now, but I can tell you with full confidence that your quirk has the makings of a great hero. It's quite destructive, yes, but if you learn how to control it, think of the things you'll be able to achieve. Even if you still didn't have a quirk, although it would be hard and quite frankly unlikely, I wouldn't put achieving your dream outside of the realm of possibility. So, yes, I absolutely believe you can become a hero. As she declared her belief in him, Izuku flashed 13 a warm smile despite his disheveled appearance. I wasn't able to properly thank the man I was talking about, so I'll take this opportunity to do better this time. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. 13 let out a short laugh. You don't have to thank me. Just call me after you're out, okay? Izuku looked to the ground, his smile disappearing and turning into a thoughtful look. Yes, about that. I'm conflicted after today. My dream's still to be a hero, but my mind is all confused. My quirk, my experience with All Might, the fact I killed somebody, it's all a lot. Izuku turned and looked at 13. I need time to think, to gather my thoughts after I get out. With how much has changed, it might take me a while. A couple of days, maybe a week. I don't really know, but I'll just need time to myself before I give you a call. Is that okay? Absolutely, that's all right with me. You take as much time as you need until you feel ready. Suddenly, a beeping alarm sound was heard coming from one of 13's pockets. Reaching into the said pocket, 13 brought out her phone again, looked at it, and then tapped once on it, turning the alarm off. Stuffing the phone back into her pocket, the hero turned back to Izuku and gave a slightly embarrassed chuckle. Sorry about that. I don't have any time left. I'm quite busy at UA, so I need to start heading back if I don't want to miss the next class I need to give. Further than your current turmoil, I know you'll probably have to fight a legal battle as well, so I wish you luck in that. Hopefully, you'll be allowed house arrest for the time of your trial. This is no place for someone as young as you to have to deal with learning how to handle one's quirk. Izuku looked away as he began to look downcast again. Yeah, thank you. I hope so too. All I want now is just to go home. Izuku looked back to the hero. But I'm looking forward to talking with you. My name's Midoriya, by the way, Izuku Midoriya. Or do you know that already? I'm not too sure what gets put into those reports you were talking about. Heh. Underneath her helmet, 13 smiled. No, I didn't know. My name is Kuroz, the hero said, bringing her hand up to her chest and setting her palm on it. Ainin Kuroz, it was a pleasure meeting you. Likewise. Now, if you don't mind, these restraints are kind of heavy. I'm going to sit down, and you should go. I know how important your job must be. Yes, thank you for reminding me. Hopefully the rest of your day will go better, till we see each other again, Midoriya. The two said their farewells, and 13 left, leaving Izuku in a better mood than he had been in previously. The hero had definitively been right. He needed a guiding hand to get him through this. With her help, he might just be able to get a handle of his quirk. He might even be able to make it to UA's entrance exam in time. Suddenly, nearby Izuku, he heard the ruffled voice of what seemed to be an old man. Hey, damn hero. Putting hope in your head when your chances are next to none. What a damn joke. Izuku, confused as to what the old man was saying, walked up to his cell's bars to hear him better. What did you say? The man, hearing that Izuku was talking to him, also walked up to his cell's bars. Oh, you heard that? Sorry, my entire world's spinning right now. I didn't know I was talking that loud. Now with the man closer to him, and only being separated by one wall, he could smell that he reeked of booze. Unlike the brown-skinned man he had met earlier who also smelled of the substance, this man almost unbearably stunk of it. What I was saying is that what that woman was saying is a bunch of crap. You becoming a hero? Yeah, not likely. Izuku felt his anger flare up again. Turning around to walk back to his bench, the boy yelled out to the old man, wanting to get out of this conversation before he got mad again. Shut your damn mouth, you geezer. You haven't got a clue of what you're talking about. Oh, don't I? I'm not questioning your ability, kid. Heaven knows, I saw the broadcast that almost made you devour my cell too before they threw me in here, and from what I saw you've got plenty of power to do it. That's not the problem. Despite his better judgment, Izuku rose from his seat and went back to his spot near the right corner of his cell, at the bars, to continue listening to the old man. What are you on about? Yeah, power's not the only thing that makes someone a hero, it's also appearances. Why do you think none of the top heroes have fugly mugs like mine or scary quirks? The truth of the matter is, with that broadcast, the world at large sees you as a villain now, even if you might not be one. That means that your fight to becoming a hero will likely be a losing battle. I am not a villain, Izuku retorted. I don't care if it is. I never expected it to be easy anyway. The old man chuckled. Never said you were one, only that society now sees you as one. Even if you somehow recover from that fiasco, it's a blemish that'll never go away. You'll lose opportunities, you will be doubted, you'll be treated differently, and people will be scared of you. Are you ready for that? To be wronged at every turn because of something that's out of your control. You think I haven't dealt with that before? I know that not all men are born equal. I've known that for a long time. Before today, I was quirkless. Really? Well, it doesn't matter. Being quirkless is different from having a villainous quirk. I know that too. Do you though? Do you really? Do you know what it means for your parents to reject you and throw you out onto your ass as soon as they're legally allowed to? Do you know what it feels like for them to try to do so before you even hit the age of 18? Because I do. I've had people reject me from damn dishwashing jobs because of my damn quirk. I'm a villain, you know? Not a big one. Not one that warrants you a nickname or anything from the news. No, just a petty thief. But the fact of the matter is that I never wanted to be one. I didn't wake up one day and decide I wanted to become a villain. Most villains become villains because of heroes and the culture they've created. If you've got a flashy quirk and a knack for heroics, then congratulations, you can do no wrong in society's eyes. But if you're different, or, even worse, scary to some, then they wouldn't care if you died in a ditch somewhere. Izuku stayed silent. He had always been an optimist, but he recognized the truth in what the older man was saying. Even he had seen a small fraction of the hatred awarded to those who dared be born different. Yet, somehow, Izuku felt a flame of defiance be light in his heart. So what? Huh? I said so what? I've realized something today. If I keep basing my life around others, then all that's gonna result in is crap. I don't care what others think anymore. They want to try to stop me from reaching for my dreams. Izuku had a flashback of the homeless man's face when he spoke to him about dreams. Let them try. Let them all try. I don't care. With my quirk now at my side, I'll render them all into nothingness like I almost did you in my previous cell. Nothing is ever going to stop me. Not you, not society, not the world. My dream will never have an end. Of that I am now certain. The intensity in Izuku's voice grew as he felt the haze of his emotions take a hold of him. This isn't about others anymore. This is about me now. I will be the next #1 hero. I will destroy any opposition that wants to stand in my way. I will achieve my dream. So, you can shut up about your damn sad life and past. It means nothing to me, old man. All I care about now is chasing my dream. To hell with anyone who says I can't. Izuku was now panting. His tirade coupled with his restrictive restraints had taxed him, and he now had to catch his breath. As he hunched over to pant more, he heard the old man in the cell next to him let out a slurred and booze-fueled laugh. Bahaha, my lord, you sure you don't want to become a villain? Most of the villains I've met don't even show half the amount of greed in their voice you just did. All right, you've made your point. If that's your mindset, then I don't think anyone could stop you from going through with your resolve. But keep in mind what I said. Being a hero's not all that it's cracked up to be. Izuku could hear the old man retreat from his spot at his cell's bars, and then plop down on what most likely was his own bench on the far wall of his cell. The old man's voice echoed as he slumped over on his bench. You said you needed time to think after you get out, right? There's this spot where villains like me go to get tipped off to lucrative business opportunities. Maybe going there and seeing the underbelly of the society heroes have created will get you to think about what you want to become. Izuku didn't respond to the man's offer for a moment. He was hesitating. Eventually, though, he caved into his curiosity. Where is it? The old man chuckled and threw himself off of his bench. Landing on the ground with a thump and getting up, he approached his bars again, now with a piece of raggedy, torn and stained paper in his mucky fingers. Poking his arms out of the bars, he tossed the bit of paper to Izuku. I have a tendency to forget things when I'm drunk, which is most of the time, so I always have something on me that tells me the address of the place. I'll be sober when I get out, though. I'll be able to remember it and write it down again, so you hang on to that. How am I supposed to grab it? Huh. I'm in restraints. I can't use my arms. Without my arms, I can't even take off my shoes to shove my foot through the gaps in the bars. Oh, I guess not. Just use your quirk, no? Izuku sighed. I don't know how to use it properly. I'm done for if the police need to come in again. The old man retreated to his bench again. Welp, then that's too bad. Heh, you have the guts to challenge the odds and become a hero, but you can't even pick up a small piece of paper. Izuku's furrowed his brows in anger at the old villain's prodding. Deciding he'd prove him wrong, Izuku closed his eyes and concentrated his thoughts on his index finger. Looking down, Izuku gave a small smirk. His finger had been overtaken by the darkness. Shifting his wrist so his finger could point at the piece of paper on the ground beyond his cell, Izuku tried to pull it toward him, with little success. Izuku grumbled in frustration. He couldn't get his quirk to do what it did when he punched the sludge villain. The greenette stopped and thought for a moment. Remembering the times his quirk had pulled things in, he distinctively remembered that the darkness he produced seemed to form a sort of dark vortex-like spiral, like when the water in a sink spiraled into the drain. So, while visualizing his darkness forming a spiral, Izuku pointed at the piece of paper on the ground and spoke out to the air in a whisper. Kuruzu. He had always seen heroes calling out the names of their attacks. He could now see why. It definitively seemed to help actualize the power. He liked the name he gave this ability his quirk gave him. It meant dark water, which he thought was fitting. Like a whirlpool in the ocean pulling in ships and crushing them, his quirk did the same. As he called out his attack, a small dark spiral appeared on the tip of his finger and began pulling on things around him. Izuku started to sweat as he felt air rushing to his finger. He saw the bars of his cell begin to buckle under the pull of his quirk. Fortunately for him, the paper quickly jumped from the ground and began advancing towards his finger. Making sure his quirk didn't absorb it, Izuku calmly closed his eyes and deactivated his quirk, making the piece of paper float down to the ground inside his cell. Getting down on his knees and arching his torso forward, Izuku reached for the scrap of paper, picked it up, and shoved it into one of his pockets. The teenager smiled at his small victory. He felt a sense of pride rush and overtake his heart. It seemed a small and unimportant gesture, but this meant he was getting better at controlling and wielding his quirk, and that he would only get better and better. From the cell next to his, he heard the old man call out again. Finally got your quirk working properly? Good. But before you go to the address on that scrap of paper, a small piece of advice. Don't go alone. Or, if you're feeling that your quirk's enough to deal with whatever anyone could throw at you, be prepared for confrontation. Villains are always looking for people to exploit and for opportunities to get something out of someone. Doesn't that mean I shouldn't trust you? The old man chuckled. Sharp one you are? Heh, normally yes, but I'm too drunk to care about anything right now. Izuku thought about what the villain said. Who could he bring anyway? He still didn't have great control over his quirk, so not bringing anyone like the villain said would be foolish. Nobody could know he ever went there, though. It would not only hurt his reputation and therefore bring problems to him, but it might also hurt his chances of getting into UA. So what could he do? I can't have anyone that knows me or that I know accompany me there. It might bring trouble to me. So, is there any way I could meet someone that could bring me there? Izuku waited for a response, but none ever came. Listening closer, he could hear light snoring. The old man had fallen asleep. Izuku deadpanned. He cursed his luck. He'd have to find something. He wouldn't go there unprepared. Unfortunately, it seemed like the only person who could bring him to where he wanted to go would have to be a villain. They weren't trustworthy, but at least then they'd have a reason not to tell on him, because they'd be incriminating themselves too in the process. He had a bit of allowance saved up. He could pay them to escort him. Izuku's thoughts, however, were cut short as he heard the heavy door to the cell room being opened and closed again. He heard light footsteps approaching his cell, and as the person whom the footsteps belonged to came into his view, he could finally see who it was. It was his mother, Inko Midoriya. The road was bumpy, but at least the traffic was light. Izuku was finally going home. It had been a week since he had fought the sludge villain and ended up in the Mizudafu police stations holding cells. Luckily, the lawyer for the Midoriya family was a sharp and talented practitioner of her craft. After a fair amount of work, she was able to prove Izuku to not be guilty of any crimes. For the damage he caused to the buildings around him at the time of the incident, a specific law about quirk manifestations was brought up to remove him from liability. Quirks, being uncontrollable, unpredictable, and natural occurrences, had the damage caused by them upon first manifestation deemed force majeure, or in other words, acts of God, for years at that point. The manifestation of Izuku's quirk, especially since he had been deemed quirkless before the incident, was an extraordinary event beyond his control, so the law dictated that he could not be held liable. His murder of the sludge villain, however, was harder to defend. From an objective point of view, Izuku had put him into submission, so he was no longer a threat. This would mean that his killing of him could not be justified since he couldn't have been in fear of severe harm to his body or of danger to his life. He was trampling him underfoot, after all. Izuku's lawyer, however, came up with quite a clever defense. She brought up Izuku's quirk once again and mentioned one of its drawbacks, his hypersensitivity to pain. Tests were done on Izuku to prove that this sensitivity was indeed real. He was made to endure certain levels of pain while he was hooked up to multiple devices that measured his body's reactions. Specifically, a certain tender point on Izuku's back was made to endure an increasing amount of pressure to measure his pain tolerance. In the end, every device indicated that his body reacted more intensely to smaller amounts of pressure than the normal human body did. With this part of his quirk proven, and with All Might's report that he had killed the sludge villain only after he grabbed his leg, Izuku's lawyer presented that Izuku, because of the pain he felt as a result of the villain violently grabbing his leg, had reasonable cause to believe that he was still in danger of being severely hurt or killed. The jury agreed with this defense, and so Izuku's killing of the sludge villain was deemed to be reasonable self-defense. So, after the final verdict deeming him not guilty on all counts, Izuku was free, and he was allowed to go home. The first thing he did when exiting the courthouse was going to meet his mother, who was waiting for him next to her car in the parking lot. It was a slightly bittersweet reunion. In truth, a strange sense of unease had been growing between the two Midoriyas ever since Inko first visited her son at the Mizudafu police station. Izuku did not know why, but Inko had been oddly cold toward him ever since the whole affair began. She wasn't neglectful, mean, or mean-spirited, no, but she hardly talked to him much, which Izuku thought was quite disconcerting since he thought she would be the first to freak out about what had happened. Every time they met alone or were left in a room together, Inko kept to herself and only responded to Izuku with short phrases. In the past week, he talked far more with his lawyer than with his own mother. With him now free, Izuku felt an immense amount of frustration that had been building come to fruition. Why was she acting this way? He understood that the entire situation might have been stressful on the older woman, but he was innocent and proven so. Why was she, even now, so distant? With a deep and exasperation-filled sigh, Izuku broke the silence that was present in the car they were both in. "Can you stop it with this? I'm tired of this silent treatment. Can you at least tell me what's happening? Just talk to me, please." Izuku could hear his mother take a long and shaky breath in, like she was holding back tears. Then, fast enough that it jostled him, Inko took a sharp turn and went to park the car in some parking lot. With the car engine turned off, Inko finally put her forehead on the wheel and began to cry. Confused at his mother's sudden shift in emotions, Izuku didn't know what to say and just kept looking on as his mother broke down. After a bit more crying, Inko finally sniffled, wiped her eyes of her tears, and then tried to put on a brave face for Izuku as she turned to look at him. She failed horribly. Her eyes were red and puffy, some tears were still rolling down her cheeks, and her lip was still quivering. Slowly, but with conviction, Izuku got up from his seat in the car and brought his mother into a heartfelt hug, pulling her away from her spot at the driver's seat. The two stayed like that for a while, his mother crying into his shoulder all the while. "Mom, what's going on?" Inko raised her head from Izuku's shoulder while still hugging him and looked toward the car floor. "Oh, Izuku, what's happened to you?" Izuku turned his head to look at his mother's head still hugged close to him. "What? I don't understand what you're talking about." Roughly, Inko pulled away from Izuku's embrace and looked at her son with a slight twinge of worry and conflict in her eyes. "How can you not? You killed somebody, Izuku." Izuku, vexed, felt anger flaring up inside of him. His mother knew he wasn't a killer. They were able to prove that to the court. So why was she suddenly confronting him with this? "Mom, I didn't want to do that. It was an accident. I was in my right to try to defend myself, even if I didn't do so on purpose." Inko weakly shook her son while raising her tone of voice. "I know that. That's not what I have a problem with." Izuku, in turn, also raised his voice. "Then what? What's the matter? For the past week, you haven't once shown a sign of remorse. The Izuku I know would have spent the entire week feeling horrible for what he had done even if he didn't do it on purpose. So why haven't you?" Izuku furrowed his brows in anger. "So you're saying I should rather be feeling horrible about myself?" "No, you know very well that's not what I mean." Inko sighed and sat back in the driver's seat and looked away from Izuku. "I'm happy you're not mentally scarred over what happened and that you're able to recover from it. But the Izuku I know is compassionate, kind, and always wants to protect people. The Izuku I know would have been more distraught about killing someone. I don't like what's happening to you. Ever since you got your quirk a week ago, you act different. You feel different to be around. I don't know what to feel about all of this. I'm terrified of how you've changed." Izuku's anger died down and fizzled away as he heard his mom's heartfelt words. She had just been worried about him. Reaching for her, he laid a reassuring hand on her shoulder, prompting her to turn to look at him once again. "Mom, I dash." Izuku sighed. "I had a very, very tough day that day, more than you could imagine. You're right, I've changed. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it must be entirely a bad thing." Izuku pulled away from his mom and sank back into his seat. Once there, Izuku brought up his hand close to his face and activated his quirk so he could look at the darkness again. With the darkness now covering his arm, an eerie sound spread throughout the small interior of the car, one that resembled the high-pitched wailing of howling wind in a deep canyon. In reaction to this, Inko looked back to her son and scooted a bit further from him. The darkness honestly scared her a bit. Looking up, she could see how the smoke-like substances rose to the roof of the car and hugged its surface before it escaped through the small gaps in the car's doors. This quirk, I think you're right that it's changed me. Ever since I first used it when I was suffocating inside the villain, I felt almost like a different person. It's like all of my darkest emotions have been amplified. All of the emotions that I try to bottle up now just explode and take control of me. Izuku turned his quirk off and raised his head to look at his mother with softer eyes. She was looking at him from the corner of her eyes. But with that, other things about me have changed too. I haven't told you yet, but I gave up on my dream the day the incident happened. I met All Might before the villain took Kachin hostage. I asked him if I could become a hero even if I didn't have a quirk. He said no. That crushed me. But then, I met someone on my way to the hostage crisis, someone who rejuvenated my hope. He talked to me about my dream and told me I should chase it even if it was unrealistic, because the dreams of people will never end, as he put it. I took that to heart, and now I'm more determined than ever to become a hero. I've realized that people will always bully, belittle, and mock me for my dream, even more so now with all the bad press this situation has generated. I can't let that matter to me anymore. I understand now that I have to chase my dream. If I don't, then I'm nothing. Inko turned to completely face her son. Her eyes were tearing up slightly again. Izuku. Mom, I'm different now, and I don't think things will ever truly return to how they were. I'm angrier, I feel more hate, and I get annoyed quicker, but I also feel more confident than I ever have in my entire life. Through all of that, I'm also still me. I'm still your son. I still love you, and I still want to be a hero. More than ever. I know this entire thing is hard on you too, but I have hope for what will come next. I really do. I will always hold you near and dear to my heart. Of that I can assure you. Inko covered her mouth with her hands as she began crying again. Oh, Izuku. Now it was her turn to embrace Izuku in a tight hug. I was so worried. Inko continued sobbing. It's okay, Mom. I understand. Inko continued crying for a few minutes, then pulled away from her son and wiped her face of her tears. I'm sorry for how I've been toward you lately. I should have been more upfront with my feelings. I'm not used to how you are now, and I'll be honest that I'm not fully comfortable with it, but I still love you too. If you do think that things will get better, then I trust you. Inko sighed. Releasing all of her pent-up emotions felt both taxing and good on her psyche. Let's go home and eat. It's been too long since we've eaten together. Izuku chuckled. I feel the same way. Izuku arrived home, took off his shoes, tossed them to the side in the entrance, and then headed to his room. After a week of hardly being able to sleep in his uncomfortable cell, the first thing Izuku desired to do was lay in his soft, comfortable bed. I'll call you when dinner's ready, okay? Oh, and I called Aldera like you asked me to. A list of the schoolwork you've missed is on your desk. They said that you'd be able to talk to your teacher about catching up when you come back. Izuku looked back to her mom, already getting the kitchen ready for cooking. Okay, and thanks, Mom. I appreciate it. Finally arriving at his bedroom door, Izuku was met with a wave of irritation as his eyes fell upon it. On his door was an All Might plaque spelling out his name. Entering his room with a frustrated sigh, Izuku looked at all of his All Might merch. Somehow he had forgotten in the time he was away that it damn near covered his entire room from top to bottom. All Might posters, All Might figurines, All Might clothes in his wardrobe and closet, All Might bed sheets. Those things once made him feel hope. They made him feel comfortable and reassured. But now, all of this stuff, this clutter, it all just felt suffocating. Izuku suddenly heard the howling of his darkness again, and, while looking down at his feet, realized that his quirk had involuntarily activated again and covered a small portion of the floor around him. Izuku, however, did not attempt to get rid of the darkness. He didn't want his room to look like it did anymore. His quirk could definitively speed up the throwing away process. Marching up to all of his All Might memorabilia, Izuku began taking them and throwing them into the dark hole on the floor at his room's entrance. He ripped the posters off the wall, tearing them up in the process. He snatched all of the figurines he owned and had stored away and unceremoniously tossed them into the hole. He walked to their family's sheet closet, grabbed his All Might bed coverings, and threw them into the darkness like he was getting rid of a bag of trash. With each piece of All Might he threw away from his life, Izuku felt a cathartic sense of relief and freedom spread throughout his body, like a weight was being lifted off his shoulders. Eventually, however, as he was retrieving and throwing away his last All Might underwear, Izuku was horrified to see his mother come barging through the door. "Izuku, I'm hearing your quirk. Is something going dash?" Inko was interrupted as she stepped on the patch of darkness and began falling into it. As quick as a whip, Izuku pounced on his mother and grabbed her, fearing that she might be consumed by the darkness. Luckily, Izuku was able to catch Inko, but not before one of her legs was properly submerged. Izuku began shaking in worry, stuttering his words because of how fast he was spewing them out. He couldn't believe what he had done. His mother might die if his darkness consumed her leg and made her bleed to death. "Mom, oh my God. I'm so sorry, just wait. Grab onto the door. I'll go call for an ambulance. Don't take your leg out of there." Um, Izuku. Izuku didn't hear his mother. He had already taken off to get their family's house phone, nearly falling and hitting pieces of furniture in the process. But as he came running back with phone in hand, he was surprised to see that his mother was not panicking. In fact, she was kind of just sitting on the floor with one leg submerged in the darkness and the other on solid ground while staring at the hole she nearly fell into. On her face was an impression that showed confusion more than anything. "Honey, I kind of feel fine, actually. I can still feel my leg. I just dash." Inko tried to pull away, to little success. "I can't seem to be able to pull my leg out." Izuku, confused, went on his knees and attempted to pull his mother out. Seeing that his mother had put effort into her attempt to get out of the darkness, Izuku did too. This only resulted in the two green nets tumbling backward as Izuku, unlike his mom, was met with absolutely no resistance in his attempt. Getting up from their tumble, Izuku stuck his hand out to the hole and immediately made it disappear. Looking back to his mother to check up on how she was doing, Izuku was shocked to see that both of her legs were completely fine. Not a single scratch was present on any part of her body. Izuku was dumbfounded. "Are you okay, Mom?" Inko sat up, confusion still on her face as she stared at her undamaged legs. Yeah, I'm fine." Inko craned her head up from her appendages into her son standing in front of her. "Why am I fine, Izuku? Isn't your quirk supposed to, you know?" I don't know. I thought it annihilated anything it came into contact with." Izuku covered his arms in darkness and stared at them. "Maybe I was wrong?" "Well, that must be the case or else I wouldn't have a leg right now," Inko said grumpily while getting up and dusting herself off. Izuku attempted to straighten out his thoughts as he was brainstorming for an explanation as to what had just transpired. If his quirk didn't turn to dust whatever it consumed, then what happened to all of the things that had fallen in there? The green net raised his head to look at his mother. "Mom, how did it feel? When your leg fell into my quirk, that is. Did it feel different?" Inko brought her index and thumb to her chin and looked away in thought. "Well, now that you mention it, it did feel strange. I can't quite put my finger on it. It kind of just felt like nothing. While the rest of my body felt the breeze of our air conditioning and the lights of your room, my leg felt kind of numb, in a sense, like it was surrounded by some sort of vacuum." Izuku began muttering as he processed his mother's account of her experience within his quirk's dark substance. Was his quirk maybe capable of warping things to other places? He had heard of such quirks before. His quirk might have done something similar. What his mother described she felt, though, added a more complex facet to things. If his quirk warped things to another place, where could this place be that made his mother's leg feel the way she described? Surrounded by a vacuum, a space entirely devoid of matter. Surrounded by nothingness, really. That's how his mother described how her leg felt. But that didn't make sense either. If her leg was truly transported into a place where a real vacuum was present, then her leg would have nearly instantly been damaged, because of the properties of a vacuum. The blood vessels on the surface of her leg, because of the lack of pressure, would have ruptured, exposing her blood to the vacuum and causing it to almost instantly boil. Her leg would not have come out of his quirk in pristine condition if this was the case. So, then, where could his quirk possibly transport things to? Maybe he was thinking about it all wrong. What if his quirk did indeed warp things, but not in the way of transporting something from one place to another? Some quirks have been proven to be able to warp dimensions such as space or time. The quirks of All Might's ex-sidekick Night Eye and 13 came to mind when he thought about it. One can alter and interact with time, and the other can warp space itself. What if his quirk could warp space in such a way that it created a brand new space? It could explain the feeling of nothingness his mother described and the way things seemed to fall in and disappear within his darkness. Looking back at his arms, Izuku felt compelled to find out the truth. If he was right, then that would mean the sludge villain his darkness absorbed could still be trapped within his quirk. Internally, Izuku rejoiced at the idea. He had been, for days at that point, struggling to find a way to safely visit the place the villain he met in the cells mentioned. He had a fair amount of money. He could pay a villain to escort him, yes, but what would prevent them from simply mugging him or stabbing him in his back once they arrived at the destination? No, he needed a villain he could control, one he could force into escorting him. They needed to believe resistance against him would be futile, and the sludge villain might just fit that description to a T. Walking up to the wall closest to him, Izuku placed his darkness-covered palm on it and tried to make his quirk cover it in darkness. Nothing happened. Izuku scared at his inability to make his quirk work. He would need to call 13 to take her up on her offer as soon as possible. This upset only furthered his desire to have someone to guide him in using his quirk. Now, though, Izuku took a large lungful of breath in and focused. He wanted to spread the darkness to the wall without consuming it, like how he did to the ground in his room a minute ago, but how could he do that? He thought about trying to make himself angry to trigger his quirk like he had done in the past, but Izuku decided against the idea. Izuku remembered the cell he had nearly turned to dust. He did not want to accidentally recreate that incident by getting too angry by mistake. No, he would need something else. He was able to spread his darkness to his body semi-easily. It's how he was now able to use Kurizu, but he found it difficult to will his darkness to spread to other things willingly. Maybe he needed to visualize something to get himself grounded again. Izuku's thoughts went back to the day of the incident. That day was when his quirk's ability to spread to other things had been the most pronounced, when his darkness had spread the most. The picture of the aftermath came to his mind. His quirk had wiped every building around him off the map, completely and utterly. Like if a black hole had appeared. It was a bit on the nose, Izuku would admit. But whatever Izuku could get that would help him use his quirk more easily, he would take. He didn't want to unintentionally trigger his quirk's ability to pull things in, though, so he'd have to be careful with how he proceeded. Closing his eyes, Izuku visualized the vast emptiness of space, with the only light present coming from stars light years away. In the middle of this space, Izuku imagined a massive black hole spinning in place quietly, like an astral ballerina dancing an endless cosmic dance. While keeping the image of the black hole in mind, Izuku, at the same time, tried to focus his mind on calming himself. His quirk acted out violently when he felt angry or thought violent thoughts, so keeping his mind away from those things would prevent anything bad from happening. Finally, as he felt his mind was as focused as it was going to get, Izuku spoke aloud. Black hole. Izuku cringed a small bit at his pronunciation. There was no real word for black hole in Japanese, so he had to go ahead and say the English word for it out loud. In the end, it ended up sounding more like he said Burakuru. Eventually, though, as Izuku heard the howling of his quirk becoming louder, he tentatively opened one of his eyes, holding the other one tightly shut. But once his eye fell on the wall he was touching, his other one shot open in glee. Where one of their house's walls once stood, now was a sheet of darkness covering it. Looking along the length and height of the wall, Izuku made sure to check if his darkness was damaging their house in any way. Luckily, it wasn't. Izuku felt ecstatic as he pulled his hand away from the dark mural. he had yet again gained more control over his quirk. His being able to finally wield his darkness to cover things meant he would more than likely have more control over moving it in general, even beyond just making it cover things. Before he could think or act any further, however, Izuku was interrupted by Inko grabbing hold of his shoulder. Turning his head to look at her over his shoulder, Izuku saw the worry and apprehension on his mother's face. "Izuku, what are you doing?" Right? He had been so caught up in his thoughts and experimenting that he failed to think about his mother and how his attempt at learning more about his quirk would affect her. "Well, Mom, if your leg went into my quirk and came out of it unscathed, then what does that mean for the villain my darkness consumed a week ago?" Inko's eyes widened, and she brought her hands to cover her mouth in shock at Izuku's implication. "Oh my God, you don't think?" "It's a possibility, Mom." Izuku turned back to face the wall of darkness. "I need to see if he's been in there this whole time or not." The young brunette began to advance toward the darkness-covered wall, but stopped as Inko called out to him again. "Wait, at least, let me hold you by the arm so I can pull you out should anything happen." Izuku gave his mother a small smile and extended his arm toward her. "That's a great idea. I'll tap your hand twice if I want you to pull me out, okay?" "Okay, good luck." Without another word, and with Inko firmly grasping his left arm with both her hands, Izuku stepped even closer to the darkness and extended an arm toward it. Unfortunately, he didn't sink into it as he had planned. Yet again, while still pushing against the wall with one arm, Izuku closed his eyes and this time tried to imagine a gateway opening. As the gate in his mind finally fully opened, he felt himself trip and fall. Izuku never hit anything or even landed anywhere. For some reason, he felt himself simply cease falling a few milliseconds after his fall began. Opening his eyes, Izuku let out an inaudible gasp at what he saw and felt. Darkness, complete and utter darkness as far as the eye could see. Saying he could see anything, though, was misleading. There was absolutely nothing all around him, just an endless, swirling void of absence. Most shocking of all, however, was the extent of his sensory perception at that very moment. Izuku could not see, hear, smell, taste, or feel anything at all, yet he felt something new within this new sea of sensory deprivation. A new sense revealed itself to Izuku in that moment. All of this darkness that surrounded him, he felt it all. It felt like he had become one with it and was now able to feel using it. Now, he was able to tell where he was and what was happening. He was in another space. It almost felt separate from the real world. The nothingness that he saw around him was all his quirk. It was all the dark smoke-like miasma he was able to produce. The space he was in felt nearly infinite in size. Izuku did not think he was mentally able to fully grasp it all even with his newfound dark sense. Most importantly, though, he was now able to feel what was present within the darkness. He was able to feel the scrapped and destroyed rubble of several buildings, metal, stone, and concrete floating within nothingness. He was able to feel the sludge villain in his sludge form floating aimlessly. He also felt him endlessly screaming without a sound into the void. So he was right. His quirk was indeed able to warp space, creating an entirely new space within which all the things his quirk consumed would be taken. A space where all that existed was darkness, where the void reigned, where nothingness was king, where he was in complete control. Having felt enough, Izuku decided it was time to leave. Turning around to go back to where he came from, however, he found himself unable to see an exit. He couldn't see anything at all, he reminded himself. Utilizing his new sense, he felt how his arm was cut off from it at some point, leading his normal senses to resume working starting from his forearm. Izuku pondered using the method he previously used to exit his quirk at the point he felt his arm was cut off from it, but he decided against it. Izuku realized that his method of visualizing things to activate his quirk was a crutch, a detriment to him in the long run. Izuku had never felt more connected to his quirk than he did at that moment. He felt like he was able to shift the darkness he was in with a simple thought. He needed to stop tricking his mind into using his quirk. He needed to will it himself. And so he did, and all of the darkness he was present and shifted all at once, tossing the rubble and the sludge villain all around as it came convening around him. Finally, Izuku simply took a step and found himself back in his home. As he came out, Izuku felt his mom pull him down. Looking down at his mother on the ground, he could see that she had fallen over on her butt. She must have been thrown off balance by his sudden reappearance. "Sorry about that," Izuku said while pulling his mother back up. "It's all right." Inko finally released her son and stepped away while patting herself off. "So what did you see? Is the villain still in there? Do we need to call the police?" Izuku frowned a small bit, enough so that you'd only see it as a small twitch. His mother could not know that the villain was still alive. He needed her to be in the dark of what he wanted to do with him. He would need to lie to her. It didn't sit quite well with him. To ease his mind, Izuku reasoned that he would only lie to her because it was to chase his dream. One lie wouldn't hurt. "No, I didn't see anything in there. It's kind of just complete darkness when you go in there." "So they might still be in there, but you just couldn't see them?" No. It's true that you can't see anything at all in there, but I was somehow able to feel what was present within my quirk like I had become an extension of it. I felt a small bit or rubble and the stuff that I threw away a few minutes ago, but I wasn't able to feel him in there anywhere." "Are you sure he isn't in there? You didn't forget to check somewhere or anything?" "No, nothing. I know because I was able to feel all of it, everything in there down to the smallest scrap. I was able to tell where it was and what it was doing. The sludge villain wasn't there." "Then how did he just disappear? Do you know what happened to him?" "I think I really did kill him. I mean..." Izuku used Kuruzu, bringing the phone he had previously dropped to help his mom out of his quirk to his hand and catching it. "Gravity is the warping of space. What I saw, that was my quirk warping space into creating a new place where all there is my quirk. So, if my quirk allows me to warp space in such a way that it can pull things to me and create new spaces, then I don't think it would be so far-fetched to say it can also warp space in such a way that it crushes things. Kinda like black hole." "But why didn't my leg get crushed then?" "Probably because I didn't want it to get crushed. My quirk reacts to my feelings, and I felt scared of hurting you, so it didn't. When I was fighting the villain, however, I was scared and wanted to defend myself, which is why the buildings I absorbed were thrashed. Finally, when I absorbed the villain, I was scared, angry, and in pain, so my quirk probably acted too." Izuku looked away awkwardly. "Remove the problem, causing it to completely pulverize him." "I see. So you really did kill him?" "Yeah." The two greenettes sat awkwardly in silence until Inko coughed. "Well, we already assumed you did before. At least now we have confirmation, I guess." Slowly, Inko approached her son and, to his slight surprise, hugged him. "I know I didn't say this before, but it's okay. I know you acted in self-defense. I don't think you were wrong for trying to defend yourself and Katsuki. I wished he wouldn't have had to die, and I wish you wouldn't have killed him, but what's done is done." Inko gave her son a smooch on the cheek. "I love you, Izuku." Izuku's heart was invaded with guilt as he leaned in to deepen the hug between him and his mother. His mother's kindness and understanding as he was lying straight to her face felt like a stab in the heart. He didn't like lying to her, but it was for the best, right? Inko detached from their hug. "All right, well, I've got dinner to get back to. I originally only came to quickly check up on you because I heard the sound of your quirk. What were you doing anyway?" "Oh, well, I was throwing away all of my All Might merchandise." Inko's eyes widened in surprise. "That's what you meant by the stuff I threw in there a minute ago? Are you sure, Izuku? You've had some of that stuff since you were a little kid." "I know, Mom, but..." Izuku sighed. "Like I told you, I didn't have a great experience with him a week ago. He's not my idol anymore. I don't want to have to see his face every single time I wake up." Izuku balled his fist in anger. "I hate him now." Inko gasped. "Izuku." Inko went to speak but stopped and thought about it for a second. "That's disheartening, but I guess I understand. I remember the report he gave to the news. I can see how that could make you dislike him. It's more than that, Mom. He utterly failed me when I needed him most. He crushed my dreams. told me I was in the wrong for defending myself and attempting to save Kakin, refused to hear anything I had to say. I don't want to idolize a man like that anymore. I can't let him mean anything to me anymore. I see. The awkward silence reappeared, but was quickly broken by Inko. Well, I'll call you when dinner's ready, okay? Okay, Mom. As she walked away, a tear formed in the corner of Inko's eye. Hearing Izuku say those words, it felt like the Izuku she knew was being murdered in front of her. Izuku lay in bed with his eyes wide open. He couldn't sleep again. He was looking forward to sleeping in his bed again at first, but now it seemed that the problem he faced in the cell he was forced to sleep in was persisting even in his own bed. During the entire week he was in the custody of the Mizudafu Police Department, he had barely been able to get any shut-eye. On the off chance that he did actually fall asleep, he would sleep horribly, waking up nearly just as groggy as he would have had he not slept at all. Izuku pondered if this was yet another strange aspect of his quirk. It didn't matter if it was he'd find out with 13 or at a quirk doctor. For now, in the dead of night, Izuku got up, walked to his desk, and sat at it while opening his laptop. He had gotten in the habit of trying to somehow remain productive during his bouts of insomnia. Now he would be far more effective with his laptop at hand. Izuku closed his eyes, his quirk covering his back in darkness. He felt within his darkness for the sludge villain, trying to see how he was doing. He was still screaming without a sound. Good, he was still alive. Deactivating his quirk, Izuku began typing away at his keyboard. Now that he had the correct candidate that could safely escort him to the villain hideout, he was trying to find out how he would be able to discreetly release him from his quirk. He would need an isolated place where no one would be able to hear them or interfere with his plan. A place where he wouldn't be seen, where no one would return to possibly see some evidence of them having been there. Taking his mouse and hovering over a search result, Izuku finally found what he was looking for. An abandoned industrial area on the outskirts of Mizudafu, one that had been abandoned for years and that had been forgotten by the government. Izuku smiled. Perfect,